Everything that's taking place in the world today is to cover one thing or another, and those things are to cover one thing or another to hide the truth of the game. Hello, it's March 2024, and about a decade ago, I talked about the human species being a bored species, and we see this today. And this ties in very well with the cycles of civilization, and I'm just going to reiterate part of that. Hard times create strong people. Strong people create good times. Good times create weak people, and weak people create hard times. Focusing on the very last one, because the human species become bored. And this is why they become the snake that eats its own tail. The cycles of civilization, where we are now, we are in the late stage of the last stage of civilization, the age of decadence, again. And we repeat history because history is forgotten, either by chance or design. And what always follows is our demise. And then there's the literal 100-year patterns within the cycles of civilization. And I've talked about these things extensively over many, many, many years. But going back to the species, the human species being bored, not only do we become the snake that eats its own tail, for example, committing injustices and tyrannies against one another, but we also want to understand, or try to understand, why. And then we get into all these social experiments and even experiments with individuals. And I'm just going to go randomly through some experiments and stuff that come to mind. And I remember, I think it was around the 1950s or 60s, there was an experiment in Canada where there was a farming couple who were not doing so well, and they were approached by a so-called American scientist. And the whole science experiment was, there was two very young boys, and one of them was going to be raised as a girl. And I'm going to skip over a lot of details and try to simplify this. And some of the strategies with that were pretty graphic, trying to convince the one boy that he was a girl. Long story short, that boy ended up, by his own hand, leaving life. And then some years later, the brother, who was raised as a boy, did the same thing. And the parents had done an interview saying how much they regret that. This type of thing is because of the human species being bored, and we have sociopaths and psychopaths who are getting into these positions where they're doing these kind of atrocities, taking advantage of this family. There's even stories about these so-called scientists doing it to their own. There was a story where they took their young boy, I think it was almost infant, and an infant monkey, and they wanted to show that the monkey could be raised and turn out to be more human than what previously thought. And what was interesting, by a certain age, after a few years, and they terminated that experiment, how the human young boy was lacking knowledge of some basic words that they should have known by that age. The monkey never learned how to speak, maybe learned a few habits, human habits, but overall remained a monkey. But what was interesting was the young boy who became more like the monkey than the young boy as human. And eventually, when that young boy grew older, he removed himself from life by his own hand. And what's interesting about that experiment is we can see how the lesser, from the human perspective, the lesser intelligent cannot become genetically lesser intelligent, cannot become greater intelligent, but the greater intelligent genetically can become lesser. And then you can start applying this across the board on all these different topics. But there was another experiment because, well, what else is there to do except make these silly experiments at the cost of their own son? And apparently the parents of that experiment, these so-called scientists, were like, oh, well, you know, that's just life. Almost like no care for their own child. So when you look at these kind of experiments that are going on, there's a plethora of them that are happening all the time. It's because the human species is bored and trying to figure something out. Now, when you go back to when I was talking about the cycles of civilization, hard times creating strong people, when there's challenges that the human species are being faced with, they excel. They will unite, come together, whether it be a natural disaster or trying to build a society, a civilization that come together and find mutual ground and build. A lot of people accept this myth that it's human nature that's aggressive and destructive and everything else, and that's not human nature, or at least for part of the human species, is to create, to do something. And then when there's nothing to do, they become destructive in the sense that they start going after each other, and we get into, for example, false allegations, false narratives, wrongful convictions, paternity fraud, and then we look on the larger scale, we get into tyranny being imposed. And this is all part of this stage of civilization where we become the snake that eats its own tail. And for anyone who's wondering what does that mean, when a snake eats its own tail, it doesn't survive that. It's trying to consume itself, and then because it's going by instinct, for some crazy reason it decides that its tail is a meal. But anyway, you get the idea. When this is the world that we live in, and we look around and people shake their heads going, this is insanity what we see happening, whether it be domestically or on the world stage. I'm saying that again, the world stage. There's a game being played out here. A lot of people don't understand the game. And you have to remember, not only is there generational commitment by those who are imposing all this other stuff, but they also have generational commitment playing the game. They know the game. They think differently than the common person. And this is why common person, they try to apply their own, for example, life experiences, their limited knowledge bases, whatever, and they can't make sense of anything because whoever's doing this, and whatever's doing this, dare I say, thinking a lot differently. And I've said before, even in recent videos, there's things going on that are outside of the human species. Now, whether you want to accept that or not, I don't care, that's on you. And you're going to be in for a big surprise someday. And all these things are real. But you have to learn the game and understand it to make sense of everything. So, just want to reiterate how the human species are now in this stage of civilization become a bored species. And those in the hierarchy of the human species, there are some that are, for example, capitalizing on this, or we'll just leave it at capitalizing on this. That's something that people can kind of relate to, but there's a little bit more to it. And then we have these 100-year patterns. It's a game. And if you can't accept that or even grasp that, then, well, it's not for you. Anyway, I just wanted to give you some things to think about. Thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, comment, and share.
Listen to this and write it down if you can't remember it. You're never going to outgrow warfare. You simply must learn to fight. I hear people saying to me, oh, when is it going to get easier? When you die.